Okay, let's see if we can drive in the last group here. So, something rather interesting happened in our life. and I have to say that when this first came to me, I kind of almost made a mistake. Because we had a guy titled the Open Source Evangelist from Microsoft calling in. And it was about Microsoft Openness. And I hope you don't hate me too much for saying you got to be kidding. So we said, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. I think Mark Gayler, who has been with Microsoft since 2003, has a very interesting message to share with us. In the interest of time, Google actually swapped time slot with him because he has to catch a flight. So we appreciate that very much. Thank you, Google. And it's going to be utmost interesting to... Can you tell us what happened? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take this one. Thank you. Thanks, Geir. And thanks again to Jürgen from Google for swapping around. Unfortunately, I've got to get to Warsaw after this event, so I kind of have to shoot off. So proof in reality that Microsoft and Google can collaborate. So... I want to thank the committee for all their organization to get me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. And yes, as Geir said, I'm an open software evangelist for Microsoft. Some people would say I have the toughest job in the world, particularly with an audience such as yourselves. Actually, I think the toughest job in the world is being a taxi driver in Malta, personally. But anyway... again, I really appreciate you guys inviting me here to talk to you. What I'm really going to do is I'm going to talk about three things today. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm kind of going to level set for you what Microsoft is doing with open source. Some of you guys might be very familiar with the things that we're doing with open source. Some of you may be unfamiliar, so I kind of want to give you a bit of an update, some of the cool stuff that we're doing and are continuing to do around open source technologies. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about our cloud platform and the benefits that kind of offers up to the open source community. And lastly, and probably most importantly, I've got some thoughts and suggestions, particularly for this community, the Marine community, MARSEC, and particularly the guys working on the MARSA architecture, which I have to say, very impressed with, really impressed with the agenda and the content that you guys have laid out over this couple of days. And I'm very sorry I can't stay longer. I really would love to. But with that intro, we're just going to jump straight in. So open source and Microsoft. And like Geir said, a lot of people look at me and they go, you've got to be kidding. I get this quite a lot, actually. You know, we didn't even know somebody was doing any of that stuff at Microsoft. So again, I'm just going to level set for a little bit and kind of tell you about some of the stuff that I think you'll be genuinely interested in. So first of all, it's important to understand that Microsoft as a company, we're working with open source technologies every single day. We're working with a variety of different projects. I mean, here I've got, Samba, Java, PHP. We're working with development tools. We're working with cloud technologies. We're working with even, CMS platforms like Drupal and WordPress. And many people are often surprised at the extent that Microsoft actively works with the open source community, which again is why it's a great opportunity for me to connect with you guys today. We actually have a dedicated open source technology center which is based in Redmond. We have some guys based in Redmond. We also have an affiliation out in Boston. We have about 400 servers in the open source, in the OSTC, the Open Source Technology Center. And on a kind of daily basis, we're working with about 340, 350 distributions of Linux, just to give you an idea. But this is it's a permanent commitment with Microsoft, and it's something that has been around for a few years and will continue for the foreseeable future. On this slide, I've listed a couple of projects that these guys are working on today, but I'm going to come back to that as we go through the presentation. The other thing you may not be aware is, like Google, Microsoft is a platinum sponsor of the Apache Foundation. I think we've been a sponsor for about 3-5 years, something like that. And again, it's something we're very proud of, something that we will continue to invest in because we see our relationships with the open source community, particularly with organizations like Apache, as very, very important. And as a result of this activity, Microsoft has also made a lot of contributions back to the community. As you guys well know, open source is about reuse, reusability, but it's also about contributing back. So on this slide is just some examples of some of the areas that Microsoft has made contributions back into the open source community. And if I pick out, there's a wide variety of things in here, things like device drivers, plugins for open source technologies, plugins for the cloud platform that we have, developer tools are based around PHP. And actually, these are just ones that we've been working on in the past year or so. There's actually many, many thousands of projects that Microsoft and Microsoft developers and partners are continually working on. Excuse me. I know many of you will be working with forges out there, things like SourceForge and GitHub. Microsoft actually has an open source forge that it manages and where it hosts a lot of the open source projects that we and our partners work on. If you haven't encountered it, it's called Coplex. There's about 10,000 open source extensions on there. We get about 3 million visitors a month. So probably not as much as SourceForge or GitHub, but it's a very vibrant community. And some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today are hosted on Coplex. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do so. And what we're very pleased about is because of our commitment to the open source community and open source technologies, we've seen a steady growth of open source projects being built on Windows. And that may seem kind of unusual or unexpected, but this was actually a research project done by, I think it was Geek Week that did it. And they found that actually out there, 80% of the open source projects out in the community actually are Windows binary compatible, which is great news for us. It's great news for you guys because it means that as you're developing projects, you've got a broad ecosystem of platforms and devices that at your disposal. And in fact, 23 of the top 25 most downloaded open source projects actually run on Windows. Not many people are aware of that. And most recently, the Microsoft engineer K.Y. Srinivasan actually became the single largest individual contributor to the Linux 3.0 kernel. Not only that, but Microsoft is now the 5th largest corporate contributor to the Linux kernel as well. And this is predominantly through our work with the Linux device drivers, particularly around our virtualization technology, Hyper-V. But again, this is something we're very proud of. I think it shows the commitment that we have towards open source and Linux in particular. One thing that many people are not aware of is that not only are we contributing, not only working with open source technologies, you can actually go to Microsoft.com, and if you're an open source developer, you can actually download some of the more popular open source products directly from Microsoft. So you want to set up a website with PHP and MySQL, you can download it straight from Microsoft.com. We provide something called the Web Platform Installer to make that easy, to make it easy for end users even, but obviously IT pros and developers to do that. There's about 70 web platform products. Some of the more popular open source products are up there. Things like Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, for example. And if you just want to set up a very quick website, you can install PHP, and if you don't have a database, it even gives you a choice of SQL Server Express or MySQL for that matter. So again, many people are not aware of the fact that we kind of make developing open source projects on Windows as easy as we possibly can. And lastly, in terms of contribution, Microsoft Research is making very active, continual contributions to open source in the research and science community. So if you scan through this list, you'll find contributions, open source contributions to biotech, science, education, really a broad spectrum of research, science, and the scientific arts. And again, it's something that we're very committed to. We're doing some groundbreaking work in this area, and some of the folks that have actually made these contributions are independently recognized by open source and academic and technology communities for that effort. So, enough of the kind of, that was kind of the level set. This is what we're doing. Some of you may not have been aware of some of that stuff, so I just wanted to kind of update you as to where we are. Now I want to talk briefly about our cloud platform. And the reason I want to do that is because Microsoft's cloud story for all of you guys here it should be pretty good news. Basically, no matter what tools you're using today, you can use them on the Microsoft cloud. We've built openness and interoperability inherently into the platform. We regard open source technologies running on our cloud. We're very committed to making sure that you get the best experience possible when doing that. So whether or not you're using Ruby, Python, PHP, we're committed to ensuring that you guys get the best experience out of that on our cloud platform as much as possible. And we are continuing to develop in this area. We actually have a lab that is dedicated to providing interoperability bridges. And what this lab does is it takes technologies such as Java, PHP, and Ruby, for example, and makes sure that those technologies work well with our Windows Server and Windows Azure cloud platform environment. And again, this is something that we're completely committed to. And to give you an example, just in the past couple of weeks, we've also announced interoperability between Windows Azure and Apache Hadoop, for example. So if you're doing stuff with big data, if you're interested in using big data connections to SQL Server or Windows Azure, then this is something, again, that we're building into the platform. So I kind of wanted to show you this just to give you an idea. This is not a one-off thing. This is not a, well, maybe we should do this open source thing to be nice to the community. It's something we're really committed to, and you're going to see more and more announcements, particularly around interoperability and open source projects running on Windows Azure. So I guess what you could say is that we've been building bridges. And if you look out the window, you'll see this bridge. I understand it was a bit of a labor of love out here in Malta. And so we think this is a great symbol for the work that we're doing, particularly as we extend our technology further and further into the open source community. So thank you guys for suggesting the image. It was very appropriate. So let's just talk briefly then about the benefits of open source and the cloud. I know you guys, several of you will be already using cloud technologies. Some of you are probably fairly familiar, probably already developing projects for cloud. But I wanted to just kind of discuss this a little bit because I think there's opportunities here for this community, particularly around the work that you guys are doing around the marine environment, marine systems development, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because we've got some ideas. So, of course, the benefits of open source running on cloud is that cloud platforms, ours and other platforms, of course, there is inherent support for open standards and protocols. So that makes it easy for you to build applications and services on the cloud. It makes it easy for you to port applications and services between the cloud and other systems. It means you have device independence. I mean, you can access the cloud with a browser. We don't care what the browser is. With a smartphone, we don't care if it's an iPhone or something else. This makes the development of services and applications, particularly for you guys, very easy, and it really encourages that reuse and reusability that's very important. Also, of course, there's minimal infrastructure investment. If you were going to set up a new project, it's very low cost, inexpensive to launch new projects and services in the cloud platform. Microsoft actually, with Windows Azure, we have an instance called Extremely Small Azure, and it's aimed particularly at individual developers that just want to set up a very small instance to run up a very quick, small-scale project. The other benefit of the cloud is the low cost of data storage. When you're running a project in the cloud in Windows Azure, for example, you're obviously paying for transaction charges, but the overall cost of that compared to the equivalent cost of setting up an infrastructure is very, very small. And even if you get a lot of transactions, it goes from very small to small. It's still small and very manageable, and the overhead, of course, of managing that is very, very small in itself. So the cloud makes it it's a very powerful platform for storing services, applications, of course, but also data. And this is something that I think is an opportunity here for you guys in the marine industry to think about what might happen with some of the new services that you guys are building, particularly around the master architecture, for example. Obviously, as you develop these new services and applications, you want them to be available to others. You want to encourage reuse. What I would say is also think about what's going to happen with the data. Because I think there's an opportunity here for this audience, for this group. What I've noticed when I did a little bit of kind of homework prior to coming to the event is that in addition to the different, I mean, there's a lot of systems in the marine industry, right? And of course, the discussion last night with Gear and others, one of the challenges you guys have is that today, the systems and the developments that are out there are very, very fragmented. So the cloud lends itself very well to providing a central application repository or a central service to bring some of that fragmentation together. But there's two areas that this can happen. It can happen at the service level, the application level, the architecture level, if you will, but it can also happen at the data level. And I think the opportunity here is to set up a kind of, obviously a web services framework, which I think is really what you guys are doing with the master architecture, and again, I'm very impressed with that. But what I would say is don't ignore the opportunity to build the services framework as well as collect the data that's coming out of the systems that will potentially use that framework. I think there's a huge, huge, huge opportunity here to collect and amass a large amount of data which then can be potentially used by other application developers and other communities. And I'm going to give you some examples of this in a second. A big advantage of this is you guys are building new applications and services, of course, but if you also share the data that comes out of those systems, you're also creating opportunities for other communities, commercial organizations, educational organizations, perhaps not even non-marine organizations, to build their own applications and services that use the data that come out of your own architecture. And I think because of cloud computing, where the cost of managing this, maintaining this is so low and so open, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And as far as I can tell, I don't think anybody's kind of cornered this opportunity in the marine industry to date. So, you know, it seems to me that you guys are in a fantastic position to do that. So I did some drawing. So I've got to apologize to the master team because this is my best attempt at kind of enhancing your diagram, okay? Oh, and it hasn't come out, sorry. So what I did, so this is the diagram in a snowstorm, if you like. That's right, what do I? Yeah. So what I did is I basically took the master architecture diagram. I'm sure that many of you here are familiar with that. And I noticed that you had a public cloud component at the back end. And basically, I think the opportunity for you guys is to create an application store up there where you can obviously put your own framework and application services in that, but encourage other people to develop additional applications and services. But secondly, also build a data store behind that. So you're sharing the service, the application, and also the data. Because then people can create their own services and applications, and they may come up with ideas that you guys or the marine industry might not even think about. And I think this is really where exciting innovation can occur in the cloud, particularly when you combine forces with educational establishments, government organizations, other commercial organizations, et cetera, et cetera. So sorry the diagram didn't come out. That'll teach me for attempting to draw at 2 o'clock in the morning, I guess. So I did a little bit of background, and of course there's tons of data out there. There is tons of data. There's environmental data. There's marine operational data. There's data about oceans. There's data about the environment. There's an incredible amount of data, but I noticed two things. First of all, there is no single point of reference for any of that data. You have to go to hundreds of different websites to find hundreds of different types of data. Secondly, I noticed that the data is in all kinds of weird formats. Some of it's proprietary, some of it needs specific viewers, some of it needs specific applications. So again, imagine that if you could free up that data, put it in the cloud, combine it with your architecture, you're creating an incredible ecosystem for other developers and communities to develop applications and services behind that. And I think, for me, this is a very, very simple and relatively easy thing for you guys to do, in addition to the great architecture work you're already doing. So I wanted to give you an example of where this has been done with cloud. It's not a marine example, but I think it's an example that has some parallels with the opportunity that you have in front of you. So one of the projects that we've been involved with the European Environment Agency is something called Eye on Earth. And what this does, it's a European observatory for air and water quality. And we have a very basic screenshot here. I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but essentially what it does is it maps thousands and thousands of data points across Europe. And essentially what it does is it provides you with air and water quality data as declared by the European Environment Agency. But what's very, very cool about this is that I, as a citizen with a mobile device, I can actually rate the quality of that data to say, well, if it's a beach, for example, or a harbor or a port, I can say, well, I'm actually at that location. You say the water quality is high. I'm actually at that location, and I think the water quality is low. So I'm actually rating the quality of the data provided by, in this case, the government organization. And so there's a couple of things that are very innovative about this. First of all, you're establishing a two-way connection with citizens and users. So imagine if you applied that, again, to the marine industry, to sailors, to boat operators, both commercial and private. This is a great way of getting that community involved in the services and applications you guys are building, and getting them to, frankly, to crowdsource some of the activity and data elements that will come out of the systems that you will end up building on top of your framework. And the other reason I mention this, so this runs in the cloud. It has thousands and thousands of data points, as you imagine. If you want to go and try it for yourself, you can go to this link. But what's particularly cool is there's a new version of Eye on Earth coming out very shortly, which has an open API attached to it. So this is something that potentially you could incorporate with the master architecture, the cloud component, cloud computing component. So just kind of a thought of that. So you might be thinking, okay, we think the Microsoft guy is freewheeling a bit here. We're not sure he's really on target. Well, so let me tell you a story and give you a case study about an open source company in New Zealand that did something very, very similar to this. So this was a company called Silverstripe. The link here will take you to the case study. And this was one of the 500 fastest growing companies in the Asia Pacific area. And they were the world's first open source CMS company to be certified for Windows Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008, just to give you an idea of their experience with interoperability. So they were commissioned by the New Zealand National Institute for Water and Atmospheric Research to build a data portal exactly as I've been describing. If you go to these links, you'll see how it works. It uses open data standards as part of the portal. The data is made available in a way that it can be consumed by citizens, but also developers. And in particular, I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the Marine Biosecurity Porthole project. It's pretty impressive what they're doing with this data, how they're presenting it, how they're visualizing it. And this actually it was winner of the New Zealand Open Source Awards last year in 2010. So I thought it was a good kind of case study to show you what can be done. I mean, this is great, but this is being done in New Zealand. How cool would it be if you guys, in Malta, kind of overtook them? I mean, this is the Kiwis, right? We know they're going to win the Rugby World Cup, but I don't see why they have to be better than you guys at open source development. So I thought you'd find that quite interesting. What's that? Well, I wouldn't ask Malta to try and win the Rugby World Cup. I'm trying to make it achievable as. So again, I'd encourage you that this deck will be available to everybody here, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look at this and read the case study. It's a very interesting one. So I'm kind of going to wrap up, and then I'm happy to take questions. We have a ton of resources for you folks that are doing open source development, deploying open source, managing open source. I've listed some examples here. A lot of the projects that are listed on this site are available as open source, either through Codeplex, or some of them are available on SourceForge, some of them are available on GitHub. So I would encourage you to look at these, reuse them where appropriate, and certainly apply what you can to the master architecture. I think it would make a great pairing and a great partnership. If you want to know what's going on with open source at Microsoft, Port 25 is a great resource to keep in touch with announcements and activities. And of course, there's MSDN and TechNet if you want to access more developer-oriented resources. So really, that's it from me. I'm happy to open up the floor and take questions. But what I would say is I think there's a lot of assets that Microsoft can bring to the table to help you guys be successful with your work in open source and, of course, in the marine industry. And I wish you all the best of luck. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Actually, you're touching upon a couple of ideas that we have been in contact with already around the environmental friendliness of the marine industry. And we have some very interesting old proprietary systems that actually track all commercial vessels. So we have some very interesting possibilities by combining this cloud orientation, the Marsa architecture, and a very good old system called IOOS that can be used for very useful things in the future. So we will see what happens, and thank you for the suggestion, and you will certainly be on the list of invitees if you want to participate.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you luck with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but it's not time.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the Microsoft guy?
So, I'm the guy in the room that has been playing with the Microsoft. Tell me about your cloud project. How does it work? What does it do?
Well, so obviously Azure is cloud-based.
What's your taste?
Yeah. So Windows Azure is a cloud-based operating system. It doesn't require any particular interface, hardware or software to access it. We refer to it as a platform as a service offering, which means that you can host data on the platform, you can develop applications on the platform, you can develop services on the platform, but you can also use it in a kind of a hybrid model. So if you, for example, we have open source projects where we have, say, like a Drupal front end, which is the user interface, if you like, the web interface, and the back end uses a Windows Azure service or a data store hosted on our cloud platform. So it's pretty flexible. As you saw from the slide, it's pretty interoperable, and it's something that we're extending the interoperability and adaptability of the platform as we move forward. Well, I think the Iron Earth application is a good example of that. So you might say, well, yeah, but I could build that. And of course, you could build something like Iron Earth with traditional development tools and architecture. However, the advantages that come with doing it on the cloud, in this case, are twofold. First of all, the cost of managing that service, storing the thousands and thousands and thousands of data points, particularly with the back end, there's a GIS back end to that. It's very, very inexpensive to do that on the cloud. Secondly, providing that service independent of, say, browser or device or another application interface is relatively easy with our cloud platform because of the open standards and protocols built right into it. So you kind of get a lot of that built into the platform for free if you're a developer, if you see what I mean. I'll give you another example. One of the things that we've seen cloud computing being used for is in government data sharing, public data sharing projects. And if I take, say, like the Iron Earth example, where there's literally thousands and thousands of data points, it's a huge, massive database, GIS data at the back end. It would cost a lot just to set up the hardware and software infrastructure to support that. So that's the scale at the top end. If I come down to the bottom end, I've recently worked with a customer. It's a little town it's called Medicine Hat in Alberta in Canada, and it's got a population of about 60,000 people. So you can imagine the IT department in this city. It's probably one guy, two guys, maybe three guys, and they recently set up a government website, their city website, to share data. They did it in a matter of days, and they've done it at totally minimal cost. So again, could you do that with traditional web architectures, PHP? Of course you could. But the point is that cloud gives you that tremendous ability to scale, and you get a lot of stuff out of the box. You get the low cost, you get it's not impacting your infrastructure, and you get that open standards and interoperability. You know, those features are kind of built in.
So the heart of it is the packaging.
In
In terms of the cloud, what's the driving force right now?
well, it's
Infrastructure, what's it made of?
it's a new operating system that runs on the web.
Okay, so it's a Microsoft project.
So Windows Azure is our platform. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah,
I didn't know.
yeah,
Quite frankly, I just didn't understand what.
yeah. It's our cloud computing offering. That's correct. Thanks, Brian. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time.